It's a pleasure to present for you. So today I will be, I see Ernesto, so I see some people I know. Today I will be presenting this work that the title is Evergreening with Miguel Faria Castro and Pascal Paul. Miguel works with me here in San Luis and Pascal in the Fed in San Francisco. And as always, the views expressed here are not necessarily the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Luis, San Francisco, or the system. This, I think in this paper is important to go through this. So let me show you what. Let me mention what is this evergreening. If you haven't seen this word, the idea is that bank may revive a loan close to default by granting further access to credit to the firm, or more credit to the firm. This potentially contributes to keeping less productive firms alive, and it may depress aggregate TFP. Somehow related to zombie lending. Zombie lending is typically associated with low capitalized banks and during time of the pressures or aggregate thing, but these are concepts that are similar. So let me say what I'm going to try to talk about today. First, I'll try to argue that evergreening may be a general feature of financial intermediation. So I want to try to show you that in a model. And then we're going to try to look for empirical evidence of evergreening in confidential banking data. And then I'm going to add this feature, evergreening, into an otherwise standard firm dynamic model and look at the implications for aggregate productivity, outputs, and different things. So that's the plan for today. As I said, I'm going to use at the beginning a static model because actually the dynamic model is not that different. So I think in the static model we can explain most of the mechanisms. So I don't mind spending a lot of time in this part. It's a small deviation from the benchmark model. We call it relationship banking. This other way of thinking of relationship banking. This is what we're going to mean by relationship banking. So this is going to mean that that firms with more debt, with more legacy debt, that they brought from the previous period and with less productivity are going to get better terms in the loan, and that may create misallocation. So we're going to argue this, and the intuition is simple. These firms are going to take into account the probability that the firm default on the old debt, and they may want to help them. In the empirics, we're going to look at the importance of this legacy debt and bank capital in risk reporting. So the data that we have, I'm sure the Central Bank of Chile has something similar. For the loans, the bank has to report what is the default probability of the loan, what they perceive to be the default probability of the loan. So we're going to use that information. We are going to show that low capitalized banks tend to lend to firms for which they underreport the default probability, and we're going to show that just with some sample splits that this happens with firms for which they have a higher debt share or that and firms that have less productivity. I'm going to show you sample splits, and then again I'm going to go to the model and to the dynamic model. But again, I think once we get the static model, this is going to be simple. So if you don't have questions on the on the plan, I will get into the static model. Okay. So this model, think of this as a two-period model in which there is a pre-existing liability. We also call this legacy debt sometimes, P, and where Z is going to be the productivity. So throughout the paper, we're going to use this notation Q as the price of the debt. So you can think of 1/1 plus the interest rate. For me that have worked on sovereign default on those things, this is kind of a standard, but it may Some people may find it a bit strange, but again, it's the price of the debt. So they borrow Q times B prime to invest on K prime today. And these are projects that produce positive net present value tomorrow. The firm may default on this debt B if it has too much debt in this period, and it's going to do it just if the value of the firm of producing and investing and is smaller than zero. And so I'll argue this Q is going to be offered before the default decision, and that's going to be the key. Here it's going to be that the banks are going to offer Q before the firm default, and they're going to commit to this offer. So let me just show you a little bit here what the problem is. So this is the value of a firm with productivity Z that has debt B, and it was offered an interest rate Q for borrowing. So the firm just maximizes, chooses how much debt it wants for the next period, and the K prime, and we make, so this is the standard. It's going to get this money. This is how much it's borrowing. Has to pay the old debt. It has to make this investment, and tomorrow it's going to have this production, and it has to pay back the debt. Just to make it simple, we're going to assume that this is high enough that you always repay tomorrow. This is one of the things that in the dynamic model is more general, but think here in the second period there is no default. The decision of default is here in the first period. So this problem, this is the problem of the firm. So this is the discount that the firm uses. So it's pretty simple. Again, the key is the Q here. So the value of the firm depends on the deal offered by the bank. So the first result is that there is always a deal good enough, or you can think of bad enough, such that the firm is indifferent between defaulting and repaying. So it's like by changing this value of Q, I can make the firm indifferent between repaying and this. So you can see from here that this is increasing in Q, right? So if I give you higher Q, the firm get more values. So it means if the bank offers you better terms on the loan, the firm is better off. So we can find this Q mean such that the firm default whenever the Q that is offered is smaller than the Q mean. Okay, so the firm came here with some debt. It's get offered some term of the loan. If the term is bad enough, the firm decides to default on this. So we can take first order condition here and find. So I'm gonna show you. We're gonna assume that the discount of the lenders is gonna be beta is gonna be higher. So this constraint is gonna be binding. So we can find the optimal level of capital from this problem.
Question.
Yes.
Clarification question.
Yeah,
so I cannot see what are the incentives to repay further than having the money to do it. So is there any strategic behavior that you can capture in this model or not? Like deciding not to repay, but I have the money.
No, here, I mean, I would, no, so here you cannot, so, I mean, no, so here, I mean, it's strategic in the sense that it's just the value of the firm, it's not based on, on liquidity or anything like having the money or not, because so the default is come on the value V, that is the value of the firm, that take into account that this project tomorrow is profitable. So you still don't have this value. You're deciding default or not. So, but before making the investment and everything, you just say, is it worth it to do it or not? And if I have a ton of that today, it's not worth it. But it's true that you cannot kind of produce and run away with money. So if you exit with zero. So that's the assumption. In that sense, that's the sense we think about before.
Juan, I also have a question.
Yeah.
This is like a clarification. Like you have the collateral constraint there, but if you have it I mean, at the end, that doesn't result of a contract where default doesn't happen? Or is it because the project can be zero profitable and then you default in that case?
Yeah, so there are, so let me say two things about this. So one is like you can think, so I said that in the second period there is no default, so you could think that these things is designed such that there is no default in the second period. That's kind of one way that you could think of it. But we have the constraint because we are changing, and this I should have made more clear, because I think there are like two differences with like a standard kind of lending, and I mentioned one. I should have mentioned the other one. So one is the timing, is that you are offered Q before you decide to default or not. This is not that standard. It is a standard, for instance, in Col and Quijo, in sovereign debt, but it's not super standard. The second one is that the Q that they are giving you is not that they are telling you, I'm giving this Q for a particular level of debt, right? So like so if you think many of these models say, well, depending how much you want to borrow is the Q that I'm going to give you. So here, no, they're giving you a Q and then you choose how much to borrow. So it's kind of the timing is reversed again with respect to, for instance, sovereign default or other applications in firm dynamics. What that means is that, if you give me money at some Q and I can ask for infinity money, I can get infinite utility today and share default. So we, like, for a technical reason, we need to have a constraint on how much you can borrow here. So that's kind of the technical. Okay.
Thanks.
And we'll get more into this assumption. And I remember I have a bullet point with these two assumptions when I get to the dynamic model, but we can talk more about, because these are kind of important to get this result that I get to explain in a bit. So lenders, so I'm gonna look at two economies. I'm gonna call competitive lender and relationship banking. So competitive lender, I'm gonna say, is the standard. They are deep pockets with neutral competitive lender. They have a beta K that is higher than the beta of the firm. In equilibrium, they offer this to lend at this beta K, where they make zero expected profit. Remember, there is no default. As long as they know this beta K is higher than Q mean, it means like the firms don't default. Otherwise, they offer zero. You can replace this Q in the program I showed you before and show that there is an equalization of marginal product of capital across all these firms. So in some static sense, if you want, there is no misallocation of capital. All the firm has the same MPK. So that's kind of relatively simple. Oh, okay, here is where I have these two assumptions. So for the relationship banking, that is the second way that we want to think about, is what we want to introduce. We have a different timing. So lenders internalize, and I mentioned, they internalize the effect on Q on the firm, right? Oh, sorry, I saw a question, but it popped out and disappeared. So so if you wanna ask it, something about TFP, something like if you wanna ask it, I think it was Moreno or something.
The question, I don't know if he's a panelist. I will ask the question and then I check. He says,
Okay.
Is the TFP of the firm time invariant in the model? Perhaps I missed the explanation.
Yeah. So in this simple case, there is no uncertainty or anything. We will put this mechanism in the firm dynamic model. But imagine here, there are different Z, but here there is, you can think, Z in advance. So if you see here, there is no, in this problem, there is no uncertainty about Z. The general model is going to have the usual process for this. As I said, the lenders know that when they offer Q, they affect the how much the firm wants to borrow, how much the firm wants to invest, and in particular the value of the firm. That is going to determine if the firm wants to continue or to default. So this is because of the difference in the timing. And then the lender owns the persisting liability B, and that would be lost in default. Okay, so the bank problem is this problem. So it basically, So let me just say, do you see the hand when I do like this here? Yeah, right. So this part
Yes.
here is what the competitive lenders would do. So they maximize, they do this, and they end up, you know, because B prime show up here and here is linear, you end up having Q equal to BK. That is what I showed you before. Now the relationship guys, they have this firm has some debt with these banks, B, that they recover only if the firms repay, and the firm repay only if V is greater than 0, and this V depends on the Q that is offered by the bank. So when the banks maximize this, they're gonna use this problem to solve this. And you can think of this being greater than BK is to say there is always a lender, another lender that has no debt with this firm, that is like a new lender and is willing to offer BK, right? So that's the price. Think of this as the price of the new lender. Remember, there is no default in the sale period, so that's kind of a constraint that coming from competition, if you want. And then you just maximize this problem. Okay. So what this implies is that increasing Q reduces the likelihood of default. So this is an indicator, just in case it wasn't clear, this is an indicator function that take value 1 if the firm repays. In particular, when we do it with in the dynamic model, we're going to have some shocks. So this is not going to be 0 or 1. This is going to be a smooth function, but you can think of the same. Reduce the likelihood of default. So it increases the chances of recovering B, but you know there is less surplus extracted from here, right? So if Q is greater than BK, they're going to have a loss in this loan. So they're willing to take a loss on the future loan to save the previous loan. Okay. And
very quickly, Ernesto here.
yeah.
If this problem is constrained by the possibility of competitor banks, why in the V doesn't show up the possibility of asking for a loan to one of these competitor banks? What if there is not a Q minus or something?
Yeah, so the term that you offer are, so it's kind of, I think this is without loss of generality, because what these guys are going to offer is equal or better than the other guys. Right, so you know, once I put that in the problem that I'm going to give you something equal or better than going to the other guy, you never go to the other guys. So we can kind of forget about the other guys once I have it in the constraint. Okay. So that's the way I'm thinking about it. And in the dynamic is kind of a bit more tricky how to deal with this. So here is kind of because in the dynamic you have to think someone starting a relationship. So it's not BK, you know, but what you can also, what we say is like there is a value, there is a Q that the guys just starting a relationship are willing to offer something. So let me say in the dynamic, what I have to offer you is a V that is higher than the V that you will get with an entrant, right? But you are willing to do it. So what happens is that, as I'm saying, you will offer a better Q than these guys because you have these extra things. So that's why that's why it's not kind of restricting what is happening here. So as I said,
Juan, I have a couple of very basic clarifying questions. So the reason why firms want to borrow here is to roll over the debt that they bring, because they can keep their surplus, their profits that way. If they default, they get nothing, you said.
Yeah, the firm here, they want to borrow because they are more impatient, right? So they have beta lower than the risk rate.
Okay.
So at this, I don't know if I have said this already, but you know, so they will be more impatient. So we'll make them more impatient. There are, you know, in firm dynamics, usually you add the tax benefit of that. That's kind of one reason to borrow. There are not, in the dynamic model, we will assume that raising equity is costly. So you just do it to grow also the firm. But in here, I would say it's the beta. Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing, you said that if there's default, the bank doesn't get anything. But on the other hand, you have the collateral. You have a kind of a collateral constraint. You don't get the collateral if you default as a bank.
No, so this is open the door to something interesting to discuss. So as I said to Miguel, the collateral constraint is more
technical. Yeah, I got that.
It has this technical thing, but actually in the dynamic, I don't think not in the result that I will show today, but in the one we are trying to recalibrate, we have the standard recovery of these models because I think it's important to have a recovery. But the issue of recovery here is like a very interesting issue because here and we kind of anticipate a bit of the result here, but what is happening is these guys are kind of remember the project, it has like net present positive net present value, right? So you invest and this project is Z, so it's always going to generate profit, but you have too much debt. So there are gains here of kind of renegotiating if you want. So if you open this to a renegotiation, this guy will never default. You renegotiate and you produce tomorrow. Okay. So what we are doing here is, we are saying, okay, imagine renegotiation is costly. So what the banks can do is do some sort of renegotiation by helping you with the future loan to prevent default. Now, if in default, for instance, I recover everything that you have, is like the bank can run the firm, and in that case, this doesn't happen. So you need the negotiation to be costly for this to have an effect. Okay. So here in this example, I'm going to make it you lose everything, but it's important to think about this, and and that maybe I'm a bit biased because I have worked in renegotiations of sovereign debt and also of consumer debt. So I think of this in somehow as kind of a renegotiation, but in the framework in which it's like, well, if the bank said that the debt is late and they renegotiate, it goes to a different, has a different treatment. While if they could subsidize the loan a little bit to help the firm, that's something that they are doing without much cost. And I'll try to argue that there is evidence for this in the empirical part. Okay, so so this figure is to show you.
Juan?
Yes.
I have a small comment regarding the model and the motivation that you use, because I could say that evergreening, this process of rollover debt, it has to do more with a liquidity problem than with a profitability problem. So company would be able to roll over debt if it can prove it is profitable, but it doesn't have the funds to pay the loan. And I've not seen this dimension that I think you could easily put in the model, but instead of doing a two-time model, maybe a 3-period, two-period model, a 3-period model, that when you say that the model is supposed to receive a loan today and pay it in period 3, but need to renegotiate in the middle because that's when it's going to receive the funds, something like that. Am I wrong? Or?
Well, so it's not about liquidity. So here it's what in the sense that that you're right is what I was saying to Sophia, is that here restructuring is costly. So the firms so we are not allowing for restructuring. So if they could restructure, that would be different, but they have to pay this debt today. So if they have to pay this debt, if the debt is B, they can borrow. In this example, they can issue equity at no cost. They just don't want to do it. They don't want to issue equity to repay this debt, okay? Because the debt is just too big for what they are going to get in the future. So it's, in that sense, it's not about liquidity. But what is true is that they could get together with the lender and say, look, I have to pay you 100 and we have this project that is worth 50. So, if you let me pay you 50, we could continue. And this is a restructuring. So this guy, instead of getting 0, get 50. So if the firm exit, like the lenders get 0 and the firm gets 0, but they could be producing 50. So in this sense, it's an inefficient liquidation, but it's not because of liquidity. Okay. So by choosing the Q, you are getting to some of this situation of saying, okay, I'm not going to get 100 from this guy, but let me get something from him. Okay.
But when you say that the project is valued at 50, but it borrows 100, that's a project that doesn't have a positive present value. So why would it do it?
No, so the 100 is the all debt that this project has. So the project, the firm has some all debt that incurred in the past. It doesn't have to borrow for this project. No, so for this project, the project net present value is 50, and he can finance it with equity if you want. So the debt it came from the previous period. Okay, so that's what I say. So that's why the project has, like the society, we want to run this project, but it has this big debt. Okay, so the question is like how do we settle this? So that's what I'm saying. In that sense, the idea of project with net present value is, if you could finance this project with equity, would you finance it? And this project, yeah, you will finance it. The thing is that the firm has this all debt, and if you want to continue, you have to repay that debt. And in there, the firm doesn't want to do it. So that is it. Exactly what I meant. Okay. So, and again, it's non-liquidity. Imagine here the firm can raise equity. Right. It has too much debt. So the firm doesn't want to raise equity for putting in this project to repay the debt. So it's we could get another discussion, but it's similar, but not exactly. If you want to debt overhang, so it's like the debt that you have from the past, what is affecting your decisions now.
Okay.
So in this graph is where we are plotting is this is your level of debt be in the x-axis. This is the legacy debt, the debt that came from the previous period. BK is the rate at which the lenders make zero expected profits. As I said, given this level of debt and given some value of productivity of the firm, the more debt the firm has, the higher is the Q mean. This blue line is you have to give me better and better terms for me to survive. This is remember the Q mean, okay? Is the term at which the firm is indifferent between defaulting and repaying. For higher Q, the firm survives. And we also here include a line that I haven't defined it yet, but it's also kind of simple to define, is that if you go to the problem of the firm and say, what is the Q at which the lenders break even? In the sense that if they give you a better, there is some B that they recover, and then there are some terms that they are lending. So if they lend you a higher Q at better term for the firm, that this Q max, the lend is not profitable for the lenders. So what you find in this setup is that if your debt is small, you borrow at this BK. If there is going to be a region that we call the Evergreening region, is that if your debt is too big, the banks are going to give you Q mean just to make you just indifferent between surviving and default. So you will survive, you repay the old debt, and then they make a profit because they are recovering the old debt too. Okay, so they are making a loss with the new loan, but when they take into account the old debt, they make a profit. But eventually, what they have to offer is like too big that they just let you default. Okay, so that's the characterization of the problem. So basically, in this evergreening region, Q is increasing in your all debt and is decreasing in your value of Z. It means that for better firms, you don't have to offer that much for making them survive. So you have to offer even better terms to worse firms. So firms with worse fundamental get better interest rate in this region. And the first the choice of capital now depend on the Q that you get, that depend on your all debt. That so what this is going to generate is that the marginal product of capital are going to be different across firm, and this is going to generate misallocation. This is statistics. So what I hope I explain here is that the incentive to save firms, the bank have incentive to save firms with worse fundamentals, prevent inefficient liquidation to recover this legacy debt, and create dispersion in interest rate and misallocation. So we still have to argue that there is some evidence for this, and also in terms of the model, there are like several things missing. Endogenous distribution of the firm is like you can argue is like, well, but you need a firm with low productivity and a lot of debt. Would you get these firms in equilibrium? So you need to have an endogenous distribution of borrowing and capital. Also, in here, like none of the firm would live in the second period, so we need endogenous entry and exit. And then, you know, what I was talking with Ernesto a little bit, you know, the idea of this repeated relationship over time. And here we mentioned moral hazard, and by moral hazard, what we mean is that when you want to help a firm, you want to get a better Q. When the firm get a better Q, they also borrow more because now they have a better Q. So they're more likely to get in trouble again in the future. Okay. So this effect wasn't here because there is no default in the second period. But here, you know, what I'm saying, when you have a dynamic model, I help you today, but you know, you borrow more and tomorrow you're more likely. So all these things, to take this thing into account, we need a dynamic model. But before we go to a dynamic model, I'm going to get to the empirical evidence.
Juan.
Yeah.
Please, go ahead, Adriana.
Thank you. I have a question. Isn't there any effect in the risk levels in the bank? I mean, doesn't it have like in the provisions or something like that of this activity? Doesn't it have any impact on the bank?
Well, so let me. That's, I think, is in question more for the empirical evidence or for reality, right? No.
I see. It is not in the model, but I was asking whether we should include it.
So in the model, no, because there is no default in the second period. So I can help you or not help you. You get more capital or not, but you are not defaulted in the second period. In the empirical evidence, maybe it's more clear when we look at the empirical evidence. So what we argue, you know, so the banks definitely have to report the default probability of the loan, and what I think maybe more clear when I talk about this, but what we're going to argue is that the banks, to some extent, misreport the default probability of the loan to be able to lend more to these firms in trouble. Okay, so that's kind of the argument. So yes, I guess the answer to your question maybe yes, but yeah, we can.
I have another question.
Yes,
this one, the result of, you know, misallocation, which goes like more lending to less productive firms, relies on, you know, productivity being deterministic and known. This literature of relationship lending like emphasizes on, as time goes by, there is uncertainty about the productivity of the firm, right? And then as time goes by and the relationship gets stronger, banks know better that productivity. Like there is like Peterson and Rajan and kind of a literature restraint on that. But here, by construction, that's not there. So that will give you misallocation right away. Maybe that's motivated on the empirical facts. No, or maybe because you're thinking about big firms where they know everything.
Let me say two things. So that yeah. So first, you know, yeah, people say relationship banking, for instance, is like a huge literature, and many times they mean problems of information and learning or something like that. We don't mean that. What we mean is that when the firm is lending today, it has some debt from this firm from the previous period. You know, that's what I mean by a relationship. So that's, I guess, is a clarification about the information and something like that. Then in the other thing that you said, you know, there is like a little part that I don't like, because you say like you lend to firm with low productivity, you subsidize, or I don't know how you say it, like low productivity or high productivity. You know, remember that what matters is not productivity. What matters is marginal product. Right? So the question is like, you know, in the previous setup, you know, all the firms have different productivities, right? But the marginal products are equalized. So what is happening here is that the marginal products are not equalized. So you could be, so the fact that I subsidize the bad firms is not what explains the result. Even if you subsidize the good firms, you know, if the good firm borrow at 2 and the bad firm borrow at 4, the marginal products are not equalized, and we get misallocation. You know, so the way you're not getting misallocation of capital in this sense that we have here is that marginal products are equalized, not that the good firms or the bad firm. You know, good or bad firm here is in terms of MPK, you know, and this is like a very different thing. And this will be, and so I guess the third thing is that this in the dynamic model, you know, this is dynamic. So these things change. So the fact that it's constant the productivity. So exactly what I was saying is that you need to have you know, this firm in trouble with a lot of data, we still have to see if this is going to happen. Actually, you will see that it doesn't happen to a big extent. You know, I'm going to show you policy functions in which you can see the effect that I'm mentioning here. It looks pretty similar. But then when we do the aggregate economy, there are not much of that effect, because it's like, okay, how often firms get in this situation, you know, in this evergreening? Well, not that often, you know, because, you know, as we always know in our models, you know, the agents are quite smart. Okay, so it's like, so that's about the dynamic or this bit constant, but that's going to be like that in the dynamic model. But there is important this thing about, you know, MPK, right? Because just to make this more clear in case it's still confusing. You know, if you have firms that are struggling and these firms are borrowing at very high rates, you know, this firm has high MPK. Now, if you subsidize these firms, you are reducing their MPK, and this may, for static misallocation, in the sense of share and cleaner, this is good, right? So you are equalizing marginal product of capital. So I'm subsidizing the bad firms, and this is good. So that's why what matters is what is the MPK, what was this? Okay. So for the empirical strategy, let's try to see. So our theory, banks take into account legacy debt, and they steer firm from default. So we try to identify this credit supply effect. So we are going to consider data when multiple banks lend to the same firms. We try to differentiate the importance of legacy debt on bank capital and reporting. We focus on banks that may prefer to evergreen. So these are kind of sample split or different ways of looking at this. So the result is that banks with low capital tend to lend more to underreported reported borrowers. So these are borrowers with more debt and less productivity. Okay, so let me give you a little bit about the data. So this is the Y14 data that maybe you heard about, and as I said, I think most central banks have this. This is the after 2008, the Fed asked the large bank holding companies to report all the loans over 1 million. You know, so these are like a lot of loans. They say, oh, every loan that you have over 1 million, I want to. This is an observation for me, and I want to know many things about the loan, the interest rate, the term, how much money, what's the full probability assigning with this, the characteristic of the firm. This thing can be merged with CompuStat, so you know everything about the firm. If the firm is publicly traded, if the firm is not publicly traded, the bank has to report a lot of information about the firm as well. So one key for us is that you know the risk assessment of the loan and of the firm actually. Talk a bit more about this. So what are these measures of risk? 1 year probability of default. This is the PD. Loss given default. So what we are going to use is the PD, the probability of default. So when you see PD now is the probability of default. Since this one is borrower specific. So this is not about the loan, but it's about the borrower. Yes, Ernesto.
One very quick question. If you could have perfect data, would you like to have, it would be informative to have loans applications, including those that are not granted by the banks? I think that would give you, I mean, I'm trying to think about how incomplete is the database regarding to
so
perfect setup.
So I mean, so the way that we are going to argue that these firms are helped is in they get more credit and they get it cheaper. But you could probably say, you know, there is also this is kind of the intensive margin.
There's a selection bias there.
Yeah, will I give you a loan or not? So you know, if I have that, it will be probably other thing to look at. Yeah, I don't think we have this, but these are loans. So that is true. So this is assuming that, you know, yeah. So I have to think what this assumes exactly in terms of the selection there. But it's true that this is assuming that this margin is not that important. So this is between firms that got the loan. We are doing this comparison, but it's true. You know, you could. I think it's fair to argue that, you know, you should also try to see if they go loans or not. Yeah, so I think that's true. I don't think we can. So let me say, so the comparison. So in general, what you are saying, the comparison that we're gonna do is like this firm, is getting a loan from two banks. These two banks have different capital. We have a part of the theory that that I took it out, but it's important for this point, is that when you add some idea of bank capital, the banks that want to do it more is the bank with lower capital. Okay? And I think so. We added this section because it's important here. Because here we use it here. So we are gonna say it's like this firm is borrowing from two banks, and the bank that have lower capital is underreporting the default probability. So of this firm, but underreporting no, it reports a lower default probability than the other firm, than the other bank, although it's the same, and it lends more to this firm and at cheaper rates. Okay, and actually going back to what I think she was, let me see, and Adriana asked me, what we do also, we show that these firms don't have higher default probability exposed. Okay, so it's not that the default probability is they are affecting the default probability of the firm. But yeah, so that's what we do. So the first thing that we do is we create this PD gap. That is basically, when the firm borrows multiple banks, we have this value of the default probability for all the different banks that we borrow from. So we say, let's take the mean for this firm, and let's compute the gap for what is the difference, and let's see if we can predict if this. Again, if you ask 10 banks what is the default probability to the firms, they are not going to answer the same thing. They don't know. They're using some model. They're going to have different evaluations. The question is like, do we see anything systematically? Systematical differences in there. So similar to Proce and Santos, we estimate if these PD gaps depend on capital that the bank have the previous period, and we find that yes, okay, that the low capitalized bank systematically underreport, okay, or report a lower. Okay.
One.
Yes.
Two questions. Sorry,
Yeah.
but here related to your simple model, wouldn't the important variable be that the bank had debt from that firm and doesn't want to?
So that's something that we look in the in one of the exercises. Let's hopefully get to that. But yeah, so
okay.
What we look is like is basically we look at something that is called that we call debt share. That is to say, is like so we basically show, and I think we do this with the sample split, is that this effect is particularly large for the. So say that a bank is a firm is borrowing from 10 banks, right? And one bank has only like 5% of the firm debt, another bank have 50% of the bank debt. So what we show is that the banks that are more likely to do are the ones that have a bigger share. So that we think that these are the ones that are likely to affect the default decision, right? So in the example, there was only one bank, so the bank had 100%. But if the bank has very little, it's like an outsider in that sense. It's like he doesn't really care, right? So that's kind of the way we thought. And it's not because he doesn't care, it's because he doesn't affect the default decision that much. Just to be careful. Because we also look at the shares in the other way. It's like how large is this debt in the balance sheet of the bank, okay? But these banks are huge ones, so these numbers are all like not that large.
Right, and so you mentioned another thing. That was my second question. The banks that have some debt of that firm but less, they're going to free ride somehow because they know the big bank is not going to let the firm default, right? So that's another distortion that's going to happen, probably smaller, but so you're yeah.
So that's correct. That's correct. So in the models we don't have firm borrowing from multiple banks, so we we don't push this that much. But I see how that happens. It's like Yeah, so just the outstanding debt, because of this evergreening, you know, the outstanding debt, the value of the outstanding debt increases, and all the holders of that debt benefit. You know, the guys that do it is the guy that hold a lot, so he's willing to help.
Right.
But the other guys also benefit from it.
Nice. Okay. Thanks.
So let me. So do low capital buffer banks lend relatively more to underreported firm. So we need to account for the link between bank firm and selection. So what we are going to do is to run this regression, that is the change in how much you lend to the firm, and this is just depending on capital, low default probability. But beta 3 is our key. So we want to see that. The previous regression, I showed you that the banks with low capitals are the ones that underreport. So what we want to do here is to see if they lend more to the firm. Okay. So here this will be a function of beta 3. Low PD is equal to 1 if the gap is negative, meaning that they're reporting less than the average that was reported. So there are other restrictions on the samples and sample split. So this is the regression that we have, and the key is this coefficient here that says that the bank with less capital are more likely to lend more to the firm with low PD. Okay, so that's what we say. This is what the firms are, what the banks are helping these firms. And different controls just to show that this is robust. We also, so if you look at the sample, we look at the sample of 2018, 2020. This is important. So this is what we call low capital buffer period, because although the banks have accumulated capital, the required capital has been increasing. So these results are not true if you take like a previous period, and they are true if you focus on a later period. We can also have the same result if we take out the COVID. So there is a bit of COVID in this sample. So this is not due to, at the beginning of the paper, we thought it was COVID, but it's not COVID. These are some of the sample split. Just split the firms in low productivity and high productivity, large loan and small loan, low payout and high payout. You think that the low payout are the ones that have more leverage, that are more constrained. So you see that this effect is true for this split, but not for the other one. Okay, so that's kind of what we want to argue, that is the type of firm that that our model would say that is where you want to lend more. I think here I also have, you know, the same result for interest rate. Instead of the change in loans, the interest rate, just to see if you give better interest rate. So this is consistent with giving better interest rate to these firms. And you know, there is a lot of different sample splits and different things that we do to try to convince ourselves. As I mentioned, I mentioned this one already. That is the time period, but you know, so we look, for instance, at credit lines. If, you know, if this is more credit lines or not. So in general, there are a lot of robots that it looks like, again. So in these things, it's like, you know, it's hard to know if this is what is happening or something else. So we argue that it's consistent with our model, and we try to rule out other explanations. So that's, I think, the best we can do. So I think with this, I have times, you know, maybe 15 minutes or so to get to the dynamic model that I mentioned it. I kind of promised this will be the dynamic model. This will be the dynamic model. So I want to get to the dynamic model. The dynamic model, I would say, is, you know, is standard dynamic model in finance, like following Copenhagen, Hennessy and Whited, Gomez-Smith. Time is discrete, endogenous entry and exit, constant labor supply, wage determined by firm entry, as in Copenhagen equilibrium. The depreciation of capital is 1, so we're going to assume that the aggregate stock of capital may change from one economy to the other. The model is similar to the static, but the firms now, if they want to issue equity, this is costly. It's going to be done like similar as done in finance. You can think there is a quadratic cost on equity issuances. And we're going to have default shocks. I've done this in the other papers, and it's just make the default decision smooth. Although you can think of these shocks as a fixed cost shock that smooths the default decision. And productivity is going to follow an AR1 that is taken from estimations of this in the data. So within each period, the firm productivity is realized. So the firm gets the value of productivity Z, and it draws like this preference shock that says how much I like to pay or default. That is from the extreme value distribution. This is after it knows the shock. The firm that know that decide not to default, they produce, repay the debt and borrow, and enter and pay the cost of entry. So one way of thinking about our model is that in the competitive lender, the contract Q is given, you know, to the firms that didn't default, is given like ex post. It's like think it's a new lender, you know, if you didn't default, you arrive, I'm willing to lend you. You kind of repay your old debt. This is here. In the bank lender, is more after I know your productivity and before you decide to default or not. Before here, in step one, I'm going to make you the offer of Q. So that's kind of another way of thinking of the difference in what we do relative to the standard model. This one had a lot of math, but just to show you how we implement this extreme value shock. Extreme value shock, the value of you pay, and this is the value of default. So the value ex ante is the maximum between these two. This is with this font. This is a 0. It looks like more like an O. So you know the difference of the extreme value is a logistic. So you can write the probability of repayment just as a function of these two, where kappa is a scale parameter. So the repayment probability now, instead of being 0 and 1, is a smooth function. You know how smooth it depends on the value of kappa. Okay. And you can also compute this the expectation of this shock. It also has closed forms. So you know the extreme value gives you these two nice closed forms. If you're going to take first order condition, it may help. So I like it to do it, but it's nothing very strange. It's basically saying that, you know, two firms with exactly the same state instead of productivity, debt, and capital, and the same offer, one may default and the other may not, and it's because of this shock. That's why you can think also there is, you know, some variance in the fixed cost that they have to pay. This is just made like this, so it's like a bit nicer, I think. But I just wanted to show you the value of the firm in repayment is choosing B prime, capital, and N is labor. Although you can write this as a static decision, you can write this as the profit. So the firm is going to have some dividends. But if they are positive, it's only this term. If it is raising equity, it's going to be this term. We calibrate to how many firms are raising equity and by how much, and then the expected value for tomorrow. And this, to some extent, is similar to what within the static model, although now you have undepreciating capital left, and we have a similar constraint. So that's the dynamic model. Let me give you a bit more on the difference between the two models. For this, remember that this P is the probability of repayment. Let me just go here. Is this probability, right? Remember, this is the value if I pay. This is the exponential of the value if I default. The value of default is 0, so the exponential is 1. And this is the exponential of the value if I pay. So it's basically the ratio of this value to the other two values give you the probability of repayment. This probability of repayment depends on Z, B, and K, because these values depend. So we're going to call this S, just to simplify notation here. This is going to be S. And Q is the interest rate that you are offered. So this is the value of repayment. In competitive lender, our equilibrium is defined by this condition, is that the Q that I offer to you has to satisfy 0 expected discounted profits. Okay, so I offer this Q, and notice that here is the difference in the timing. So even in our version of the standard model, it had like this different timing in which I offer you Q, and you go and borrow B prime and invest K prime, given the Q that I offer to you. So in that sense, this is like you could think of this also as as an entrance, if you want. And then this is where I expect that you will repay, and so that has to be equal to Q. This is per unit, right? In here is simple to add. If you don't repay, you recover some value, and this is what we are doing now, and this has to be equal here, but this is like in default, you get 0. When the lender chooses Q, it's going to be subject to a participation constraint, and this is where I answered to Ernesto at the very beginning, is that the value that I give you, that is inside this P, this is the value that the firm gets with this Q, have to be greater or equal than what the firm gets with a new entrance. But here we cannot write it simple in terms of the Q, we have to write it in terms of the value function. But this is the probability. Now, what I get is multiplied by the probability. Remember, it was an indicator function in the static model. Here is the B that I recover. This is the deal that I give you. In the static model, this part is simple. Here is just the value function of a bank that get with a different state tomorrow, right? So the bank tomorrow is going to get with Z prime, with this debt with the firm. That is what the firm borrowed given A's and Q, and with this level of capital. Okay, so you write this problem recursively. So that's the extension from the simple model to the dynamic model. Is clear? There are a couple of things that are new, so it's not. Yeah, that's it.
The Q from the relationship lending is always higher than the one from competitive lending.
Yeah. So the way of so let me be so.
Because I'm thinking about the misallocation part. If the interest rates are lower, then
no. So so I don't think here. Okay. So here I don't have the it's Bernabé, right? So here I don't have the value of this W for a new lender, right? So let's say a new lender is defined in the paper, is the one that gives you this Q new. But basically think on this problem, if B is equal to 0, right? This is a new lender. The new lender is gonna give you this money today, and this is what the lender expects to receive tomorrow. Okay, from tomorrow on, it will not be a new lender, right? So he's expected to subsidize. So so let me say that the new lender. So the guys in the relationship are always going to give you something better than the new lenders. Your question was, do they offer a better deal than the competitive? We don't have at the same time the competitive and the relationship. When we have relationship, the outside threat for the firms are the new lenders, not the competitive. Okay, is that clear? The difference I'm trying to make? It's like these are two different worlds. These are not in the same economy. In this economy, the outside option is to start a new relationship.
But you're comparing two economies, one with relationship lending and one without. In the one with relationship lending, there's going to be less dispersion in interest rates.
Well, yeah. So that's hard to know, Alexander. I don't know. Okay. But maybe you have a hunch and help me.
No, I thought because you were talking about misallocation at the beginning and the dispersion in the marginal product of capital.
Yeah.
But since relationship lending is going to lower the interest rates for the for some of the firms, it's going to reduce the dispersion. So I was trying to think the intuition of your resultant misallocation.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So in the static model, I know it creates misallocation. In this one, I don't know. I think kind of what I want to show with the static model is that this thing may create misallocation, but I think as I answered to Miguel earlier, in this dynamic model, it depends on which firm get lower or higher rates. And there is the way to think is in the competitive lending, there is a lot of dispersion of interest rate already, right? So the way that we did in the static models, we say in the competitive, there is no dispersion. In this one, there is dispersion, so I know there is more misallocation. In this one, I don't know. And actually, I share your intuition that, and that's what I gave to Miguel when I was introducing, when I was talking about MPKs, is that if you are helping firms in trouble that are already have a higher interest rate, you may reduce the static misallocation because this can have high marginal product capital. But in this model, there is also another sense of misallocation that is a dynamic misallocation, is in which firms survive and which firms don't survive, right?
Yeah.
So they are, in the static we kind of overlook at this, but here you're gonna have, well, you're making low productivity firms survive, so that may be dynamic. But theoretically, I cannot say anything on misallocation in this model. I don't know, but I share the hunch that you. And the other thing that I wanted kind of to say is that in this model, when you are an entrant, you just set b equal to 0. So now this is what I give it to you. But tomorrow, I know I cannot commit to be, to not to behave strategically, right? To try to save you. So in the future, I'm going to give you Qs that are equal to BK or higher, right? So what that means is that this Q here, if for the entrant we have a 0 profit, is this Q here has to be lower. So to some guys, when I start the relationship, I'm going to give you a worse deal than what I will give this guy, just because of 0 profit here. So that's also kind of some misallocation that I'm creating here. But we haven't proved that, but it's a hunch. Kind of to go with the one that you have before, I have also this thing here, but we can probably show that.
I see. Okay.
Okay. So I don't have more on the explanation of the model. So if you have more questions about the model, let me know. If not, I'm going to show you kind of how we calibrate the model. So basically the parameters at the top, you have the target. I will show you how they fit, and the parameters at the bottom we took it from somewhere else. So these are, I think, is more interesting, is the moment that the model is giving we are trying to get book leverage, market leverage, we're trying to get some investment to assets, and this part is, I stopped a code that we're running in the server this morning, so this is hopefully it will improve. So we try to get the exit rate overall, the exit rate of entrants, the frequency of issuance, the size of the issuance, and the size of exiting firms. So this is where we want to improve the most. Now, is that I think it's important for us to get well or to fit well the relative productivity or the relative size of the firm that exits, because we are arguing that this is going to help the firms that are near exit. So I need to know how large they are in the economy, because that's going to matter how important this is at the aggregate. These are the policy functions, and this is when you see the policy function, let me explain to you. This is the price Q, okay? This is the probability of repayment. So you see, so let me start by the probability of repayment. As you have more debt, on the x-axis is debt. In this one, on the y-axis is probability of repayment, and you have more debt, the probability of repayment goes down. The blue line is above the dashed red line because you are helping some firms in trouble. So when you help firms in trouble in this range, they have higher probability of survival. This help that you give is, how do you help them? You help them by subsidizing the interest rate that they get. Okay, so here these are two very similar, but here you start subsidizing the rate when the default probability is high. And we assume that you cannot help them with more than the that you cannot give them interest rate lower than the risk-free rate, because here we're assuming this is not had any cost in terms of the banks, in terms of reporting or things like that. So I think if you give negative interest rate, probably something that the supervision people can realize. So this is why this goes to the risk-free rate, that is 3%. And you see that this distorts capital and borrowing, right? So this is the policy function. And we look at this and we say, oh, the effect may be huge. But you have to think about, okay, which firms, what is the size of these firms? So you can see here in terms of debt and in terms of capital, these firms are small. Okay, the ones that are getting this subsidy are small anyway. And why are they small? Because the firms that have a lot of debt, as in the 2-period example, is like your project may be good, but if you have a lot of debt, again, this is what is related to debt overhang. You just don't want to invest in a firm with a lot of debt, because what you are doing is increasing the value of the outstanding debt. It's in some sense repaying the old lenders, right? So even in the competitive, you know, how much you invest is decreasing in your debt. So this is holding up a bit more, but you know, these are small firms, so the effect, you can get the effect maybe small. And this is what we do is compute here moments of the economy for the competitive lender and the relationship lender. And this is work in progress, but in general, we see there is more in the relationship. And this is something we find in general, there is more leverage. The interest rates on average are lower. There is more capital. You know, this kind of what I show with the policy. If I give you a given rate, you invest a bit more. There's some effect on the exit rate, but not much, because there are like two forces. On the one hand, I'm helping firm more, but they also borrow more because there is more debt. They may default more, so it's end up being close to zero. In this economy, we have like very few zombies, like 1.4 of the firms are zombies. Aggregate debt increases. This is what we say kind of it's more a hazard. I give you better rate, you borrow more. There is more capital, and there is a decline in aggregate TFP. So that those are the results. But I think there are things of this that don't change. But you know, but for instance, the effect on the exit rate, there are two forces, so these things may change. And even with aggregate TFP is what I was saying to Bernabé, you know, even with aggregate TFP, the effect I think could go either way. So something that we can do is to say, what are, you know, there are many empirical studies trying to find zombies. Okay, so I don't know if we should have used the name zombie here, but these are firms.
Which ones are the zombies exactly in the dynamic model?
Yeah, so basically, in the dynamic model, I can compute this Q in the dynamic model. Like given your state, I can say what is the Q of zero profit for tomorrow. Okay, with the decisions of tomorrow, and then I can compute the Q that you were given. And if that Q is higher, I'm gonna say you are a zombie. Okay. So what I was saying is that maybe the name zombie. Actually, in my call, I call them subsidized firms. You know, they get like a bit of subsidy relative to the competitive lender. But so that makes the survival probability a bit higher, but it's not that they would exit for sure in that. So zombie is more like this firm, if I don't help, it's gonna exit for sure. Here, what you are distorting is the probability of exit of the firm. But those are, so here it's just a comparison just to tell you how firms look like. You know, the zombies are large firms with a lot of debt. And they have, in that period, lower profits, lower productivity. And on average, they're paying high interest rates. So these are firms that are struggling, okay? And something that you see here is that the interest rates are very high. So the reason to introduce some recovery is that this interest rate would be lower. And then so that those are basically the results. So I think I get to a conclusion. So we did a small modification to a standard firm dynamic model to generate incentives to Evergreen. So that means that offer better terms to firms with pre-existing borrowing and that they are struggling, have low productivity and a lot of debt. This induces firms to borrow more and invest more in generate misallocation. At least in our result that we that I'm presenting, you know, aggregate TFP is reduced. So we document Evergreening in data for large U.S. bank holding companies. Low capitalized bank distorts default probability, and then relatively more to these firms that underreported firms that have for which was reported lower default probability than on average. The effect is driven by larger loans and less productive firms, consistent with the model. And when we put it in a dynamic model, what we find is that there is less aggregate productivity, larger firm, more debt, and lower interest rates. Aggregate output is kind of similar. They combine the decline in TFP with more capital. Okay, so I'm ready to finish and talk more about it.
So one comment about the misallocation, I guess there's the extensive margin comes into place there because the interest rates are smaller compared to what they would get if they didn't have relationship lending, but these firms would close otherwise and they remain open with relationship lending. So that's a different effect on the misallocation.
The misallocation, so I mean, something that is kind of difficult is like, I think our two-period model have a lot of the things that the dynamic model have, but you know, the effect on misallocation are kind of different, and I agree with you. It's kind of hard to see. So in the dynamic model, it's hard to see. We are trying to compute like some sort of the composition to see where it's coming from. To say, for instance, can I compute this model with the exit decision of the other model or something like this?
Right.
To try to see if the difference come from the exit decision or from the interest rate or you know, from some intensive and extensive margin or something like that. Yep. To see if I can say where it's coming from. Because, you know, I have the same hunch that you mentioned, that because you are giving a subsidy to firms that are paying high interest rates in terms of static misallocation, this looks like good.
But they would close in one economy. Then, they would close.
Yeah. So if you compare, this firm was going to survive, say, with 50% probability and pay an interest rate of 15. Now it survived with 60% probability and pay an interest rate of 13. Right? So I think there is the change in the probability and the change on the MPK. The MPK goes in the right direction. The other goes in the wrong direction, I think. So yeah, so that's why I said, you know, at the aggregate, I actually, you know, in the dynamic model, I'm not sure it has to go in one direction or the
other. Juan?
Yes.
Hi, Juan. Andres Fernandez here. How are you doing?
Yes, good.
Great to have you here. I have a couple of questions. Perhaps the first one is rather outside the model, unless I missed something. But the model, can the model speak to this connection between low capitalization and higher probability of defaults, or not? Or if it's outside the model, what do you think is there? What
low capitalization of banks?
Yeah.
So there is like, so one way. Okay, so I think in the model we have an extension that in which we show that this evergreening region is larger for banks with low capital. Okay, so that's kind of one connection, you know. So you expect banks with low capital to do more of this subsidy to loans if you want to help you survive. So that's one thing that we can say. I didn't show it today. I was actually I put it. I was about I put it and took it out. I didn't know I was in the management of
but what I'm trying to get at, one, is what is the mechanism that is driving this? Do you have an idea? Is it in the model? I guess it's not.
So I mean, the way that we think about this, although it's not that obvious as we thought. So, you know, if you look at the paper, you will see kind of what assumption we have to make to make it work. But the idea that we have is like how much the banks would hate to have this firm default, right? So the firm have some old debt, the bank has some old debt with some firms, and what they are trying to do is to make this loan survive. So the question is like, how much would they dislike if this firm default, right? And the argument is like, well, banks that are, say, closer to some constraint in terms of capital may dislike this more. Okay, so that is, you can think of marginal utility, something. So if you have more capital, the effect is you lost the same loan, but in terms of marginal utility, it hurts less. Okay, so that it's something like that to the argument in theory. What I want to show you is in the data, this is the this is the capital buffers is the difference. So I'm trying to write the difference between the required capital and the capital that the bank have, right? So you probably So this has been decreasing. So our regression, the effect of capital is actually works in this region, in this part here, it works. But if you run the regression in this region here, where the capital buffers are very high, we don't find this effect. Okay, so that's another way empirically to argue that the capital matters. So I think this is, if I do 2014 to 2017, the same regression I showed you before, none of these things are significant. And if I do 2018 to 2019, that is the low capital excluding COVID, it works. And what I show you in the data is 2018 to 2020, what I show you in the paper. So that's like another way of thinking. And the low capital buffer come from the fact that the banks didn't, so you have the bank after the financial crisis increasing. By the way, these are the large banks, the one in Y14. They increase their capital, but also, the capital requirement increased. So when I look at the buffer, it's not that they don't have that much capital. They increase capital and they kept it here, but the requirement increased. So that's why during this time we say that the buffer is low. Yeah. Okay. So sorry, that was the kind of, I just wanted to show that on the empirical side, that talked a little bit about this.
I guess, well, you already answered the second question I had, which was related to policy. So how much of this, or to what extent this is driven by low capital requirements on some banks that is pushing them to this evergreening? So I was wondering.
Yeah. So we think there is a connection there. I mean, we see it in the data. I mean, unless this, I mean, it's not super strong evidence. It's just like split the sample in different periods. But we also, the way we do it in the regression, this interaction between capital and under-reporting is because, in our model suggests that the evergreening region would be larger. And we do find in the regressions that the banks with low capitals are more likely to under-report the default probability. So that's also at the bank level, but we find this only when we run the regression in 2018, 2020, when on average banks have low capital. So definitely we think there is a connection with capital. And that's also talking a little bit about, the idea of zombie also is related to capital and things like that. So yeah.